Oh, and welcome to our weekly LinkedIn Live leadership series, Voices of Leadership. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Eastwood, your host and the founder and CEO of E=Y. Each week, we explore the fascinating world of leadership, featuring voices from various generations, industries, and backgrounds. A team's job is to deliver the business results. It's the role of the leader to empower, inspire, and enable the people and the team to deliver those results. And there's actually a repeatable formula for that. And this is what drives success, the E3 leadership code. Express the end vision, engage your people, and execute with precision, all powered by emotional qualities. However, each leader's approach to applying that E3 leadership code is unique because there's no one way to lead. And that's what these sessions are really all about. How can we hear from different leaders and how do they show up? So, this is an interactive session. So, please feel free to let us know who you are, where are you calling in from. Feel free to share your LinkedIn and network, but also ask us questions because we are excited to really tailor this and answer your questions. So, today I am so excited to introduce our guest, Amber Wynne. Amber and I met at Disrupt HR Princeton 2.0. And let me just say, her talk, Diary of the DEI Lady, was one of the most hilarious, honest, and thought provoking moments of the day. She had the whole room laughing and leaning in. Because Amber is an inclusion strategist and culture transformation expert. And while the acronym DEI might be getting some side eyes these days, Amber's not here to cancel it. She's here to evolve it. Her leadership style, it's all about care, clarity, and showing up for people in a way that builds trust. We're going to talk about why belonging still matters, why it's changed, what's actually changed in the DEI conversation, and how leaders can keep doing the work even if the words feel heavy. Amber, welcome. So
Thank
excited to have you
you.
here. I didn't do justice on your introduction, but tell us a little bit more about who is Amber and how you got to where you are and what are you doing these days?
Kathy, that was an amazing introduction. I wish I could carry you around with me and just, help me help me just stay empowered. That was incredible. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. When you asked me the question, like, who am I? I do love the title that you used, inclusion strategist, culture architect. I've been doing the work of DEI, inclusion, engagement, or culture transformation for nearly 2 decades now. I've been across various industries. So I started in financial services, I moved into retail, tech environment, and then I went into big tech when I joined Meta. And just most recently, I was in the life sciences biotech space, all doing culture work, all really deep expertise and experience across the board when it comes to building really powerful, really strong, inclusive organizations that are built on empowering people and giving them what they need to fully thrive and fully belong. That's the work that I've been doing. It's the work that I'm still incredibly passionate about, even during the current period that we're in, when there's some more scrutiny and a little bit of backlash that we've been experiencing over the last year or so.
Yeah, and we'll dig into that a little bit, but when when you and I talk, and it's interesting because you come from that culture space, that HR space, you've been embedded in HR for a long time and helping companies really thrive. It aligns so closely to all the stuff we do at E=Y as far as leadership,
Yeah,
right? Because what I hear you saying is inclusion, when people feel included, when they're part of the conversation, they engage better. And that's how you deliver results as a leader, is making sure everyone feels included.
absolutely. I think that we can see in a lot of ways the inclusion work is always been and is even more so now, being attached to and aligned with engagement strategies. And I think that's a really powerful place for inclusion to sit, right? Being able to say, like, we know that in order for someone to be fully engaged and for an organization to benefit from all of the things that the data shows us that engaged employees can offer, then inclusion has to be at the heart of that, right? And so I do think that as a leader, to not be an inclusive leader would leave a lot out of your sort of leadership toolbox. And so it has been a great privilege of mine to be able to work with some of the most incredible leaders in the world and be able to really be thoughtful about what does it mean to show up inclusively and what does it mean to offer that to my teams. And for every leader, I think that looks a little bit different. For every employee, what they need to feel included is going to look a little bit different. And so those are some of the most powerful moments, I think, as an inclusion leader, to be able to work with a team, work with a leadership group, to be able to say, like, we have data from engagement scores, perhaps, that's showing us that there is a little bit of a different experience that either this team or this community or whatever group may be feeling. Let's unpack that and start to think about how we can work together to build some strategies that can turn this around and be able to say honestly that this is a place where everyone has a sense of belonging and everyone can feel as though they're included.
I love it. And when you think about diversity, Amber, and I think you know where my point of view is. It's more than just gender and culture, and it really is all kinds, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes the minority in the room might be an introvert. It might be someone that someone that's more heartfelt in a whole room of logic-minded people, right? It's
Right,
someone that
right.
is not the majority in the room.
Absolutely. I think, when you think about diversity, I know over time it's become this really complex and to some people maybe even like a trite term. But it really is just about all the ways in which we may be different or even the same, right? Like it's all these aspects around what it means to be Amber or what it means to be Kathy, right? Some of those things might be on the surface, some of those things might be very easily discernible by others. And a lot, probably most of them are not, right? Like when you think about some of the key things that maybe make you who you are, some of those life experiences or some of those identity groups that you may belong to can't necessarily be observed on the
Mm.
surface, right? So I do think that we somehow over time have gotten away from that, where we've sort of lost the thread of diversity being more than just some of those traditional dimensions, which I think still matter quite a
Sure.
bit. I think they impact our experiences, whether we like it or not. They're going to impact like how the world sees us, how the world aesthetically maybe absorbs us matters to how we experience and how we can navigate, right? What we have access to, what we don't have access to. But I do think that beyond that, when we think about diversity, we have to think of it more holistically and deeper than just some of those traditional dimensions.
Yeah, I agree. So, we obviously met at Disrupt HR Princeton, and we had this 5 minute window, right? That we were able to talk and give our story. And Ralph's actually, he's on sharing and he's like, Amber was fabulous at that and a great speaker and an important message.
Well,
And
thank you
I
so
totally
much,
agree.
Ralph.
So, what inspired you to create that Diary of the DEI Lady? And what's the biggest leadership lesson that you really learned from sharing your story?
I mean, the inspiration for it, really, I was having some conversations with a really good friend, and one of the people in my life that challenges me when like I'm my initial thoughts with that opportunity were a little bit different. And I think, she asked me, like, well, what if you just really did tap into this moment that we're in right now, right? Like, let's not shy away from it. Let's lean into it, because she knew, as you all now know, those of you that were in the room, that I had a different take on it, something that might be a little bit more refreshing, surprising to some, but that was more so motivational than anything else, which, for those of you that weren't there, my particular thoughts on this moment that we're in, whether you think of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or other names that it may have, is that this is a moment for us to lean in and to not shy away, to really like face the moment that we're in really honestly, boldly, and to be able to say, we didn't necessarily get here by accident, right? There's been a lot of work that we've done over the years in the DEI space and surrounding it that wasn't always based in data, that wasn't always looking at the work from a very holistic view. And I think that with that, knowing the huge momentum that the work had around COVID and the murder of George Floyd, the 2020 time period where there was just unprecedented interest and energy into the space, those of us that were practitioners, like, what did we do well during that time? And what can we reflect on and say, like, we could have done better? Like, we could have brought more people into the conversation, right? Like, we could have, as a leader in the space at that time, it took a lot to pace ourselves, right? Like, I remember telling my teams, like, no, like, as tempting as it may be right now to, throw everything that we can and do 1,000 initiatives, we need to make sure that we're doing a few initiatives really well, and that we're focusing on the things that are going to make the most impact, which are empowering and educating our leaders on how they can show up most inclusively, getting really clear on our data, and ensuring that the work and the strategies that we're creating are data informed. So as I thought about and reflected on the years leading up to this moment that we're in, Diary of a DEI Lady kind of emerged, right? And through conversations with my former colleague and good friend, who helped me sort of refine my message, like, that's where we got to with that 5 minutes of, like, we're here for a lot of different reasons. The work is still very, very important. And regardless of how we have to navigate this current moment that we're in, for those of us that have always been truly committed, and the organizations that have always been truly committed to the work, there is a path forward.
Yeah.
And it looks like, obviously at all times remaining compliant, doing what we have to do to ensure that, we're doing this in a way that is legal and indeed still aligned to, our governments and our standards and processes and all of that, but still not losing the momentum and not shying away from our values, our culture, and the things that we've committed to. And so that's where that sort of 5 minute speech came from, Diary of a DEI Lady. It was intended to ensure that we took an honest look at where we've been and then take a really bold step forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was extremely powerful. And, as you're talking through it, and, I think there are two sides to when we think of DEI. There's this compliance, which I think is where it's gotten the bad rap, right? And in some cases, that's where people are getting hung up. But the leadership side and the inclusion side and the belonging, that doesn't change. It doesn't, it is still so critical in everything we do. And, I heard you here say the words empower and then educate our leaders. It reminds me of, I remember it was COVID, and that's when I started the business, by the way, like February of 2020, like perfect time to start your own business, Kat. Well done. But here we are going. And so we did a webinar and I asked people, I'm like, so have you asked your people how they feel? And they're like, what? Like, what do you mean? No, we're just ignoring it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then when the George Floyd was happening and all the riots and things, I'm like, have you asked your team, how do you feel? What does this mean? And again, leaders felt it was the easiest thing to do was to bury their head. And if I don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, some leaders took that approach, I think, because the anxiety around, if I ask the question and I don't know how to handle the answer, right? Like, for some people, that was just an easier path. And I think there were others who jumped into conversation and maybe could have been more thoughtful, right? Right. Where it was like there were a lot of people who discovered halfway into a really sensitive, really heavy, intense conversation, halfway through it, they realized I'm not equipped
I'm
for
out of my
this.
depth.
And yeah, and I wasn't prepared. So I do think that there were a lot of different approaches maybe that leaders took. And I mean, at some point, everyone probably got to the point where they were like, okay, I'm just trying to do the best that I can to sift through, what it is that's in front of me. And if you happen to be lucky enough to have a very diverse team during that time, and if you had um, people who were experiencing that moment from different angles, right? Like you might have had people who are, again, we talk about different dimensions of diversity. Perhaps you have family members or you yourself or someone who's on the front lines during COVID, right? And so the way in which you're experiencing what's happening is very different than someone who can work from home and, be remote and quarantine, without issue, right? If you had someone who was African American on your team and they were watching like you said, the riots and the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and feeling it on a very personal level, then you had that dynamic on your team. And everyone, for the most part, I think most people wanted to show up as best they could to support their people. But not everyone really knew how. And I think that was some of what was the reckoning during that time period, in which led people to realize, oh, this inclusion work, which had been going on for quite some time before that moment, right? But
Yeah.
I think that was when a lot of people started to connect the dots of like, oh, this could be really helpful. Some of those things around um, managing bias, handling very, very sensitive conversations with care, um, being able to have conversations and listen to understand as opposed to listening to respond, right? Like being able to like really hold space um without necessarily holding yourself to like we have to have this outcome of the conversation, but just being able to hold space to let people process through the uncertainty of that time period. I think that's where inclusion and organizations that had really strong inclusion programs where they just came in and did the work in its most honest and direct form, right? Like that was a really powerful moment to be in the DEI space those few months directly following the murder of George Floyd. Because I mean, I was at Meta at the time, and I do think that the way in which the team really rallied around the organization and really did a lot to hold space, have conversations, support one another, whether it be from a well-being standpoint, whether it be just from a dialogue standpoint, it was all there. And I think that was a perfect example of like how we want to show up in those moments.
So as you're talking about it, it's interesting. So some of the companies that I had been working with at that time didn't have any programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were smaller companies. And so therefore there was no preparedness. And so as you're sharing this and listening, right, the power of being prepared for what's coming up allows you to react and lead through chaos or a crisis that comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's difficult because so many where we live in an information world right now, right? So there's so much information. And as soon as something happens, you have people who have formed an opinion on one side or the other side. When you work in a space like HR, it could be inclusion, it could be, talent development, it could be employee relations. It really doesn't matter. Remaining neutral in that moment on certain things and not resisting the desire or the temptation to jump into opinions, politics, whatever. Like it's really difficult sometimes to just stay on the facts of, okay, this is what has happened and this is what we're dealing with as an organization. And so how can we best support our people during this time, whether that be through, I know organizations during that time, some of them were doing like leaves of absence for periods of time, right? Where it was like, if you need um, a couple weeks, if you need a couple days, like we're offering this time to you in order for you to be able to take care of yourself, take care of your family if you need to. And I think that was one of the things that during that time being in the HR space, it was really helpful to be able to say, like, okay, so this is how the HR team comes together and deals with some of the things that are happening at this macro level, whether it be, in our local area, in our country, in the world. Um, and we use what we have. Not every organization obviously can offer everything, but what do we have at our disposal to be able to show up to support our people? And how can we empower our leaders to do that? And then at the organizational level, what are other strategies that we can come up with that are feasible for our organization, but also demonstrate that we care and that we're doing our best to show up for everyone in these moments.
Yeah. And that word "we care" makes a huge difference, because that's what is keeps people out of company. It's what keeps communities going. It
Yeah.
keeps what drives success, quite honestly, is we care. And we're
Mhm.
not just an engine. You're not coming. And because how many times do employees come into work to just clock in to get, their paycheck? It's okay, but you're not going to get very far if that's the way you set up your systems.
Right. And most people don't want to show up like that. I think in most cases it becomes a survival mechanism for some people, right? Like the culture is one that being myself, showing up wholly, showing up with all the aspects of who I am doesn't feel safe here. And so I'm going to come because I need my job. I need, you know what I mean? This is how I feed my family, or this is how, whatever the case may be. But because the culture is not one that makes me feel included or makes me feel as though I'm psychologically safe, I'm going to come in, do my job, and then immediately leave, right? Or whatever chances that I have to go above and beyond and to really give my best. I may not do that because it doesn't feel like a place that would appreciate or reciprocate that in any way to me.
Yeah. So, what advice do you have for leaders on how can they be more inclusive, right? So, how people can feel safe to show up as themselves and want to be there.
The first thing I would say is remember that it's a everyday moment by moment decision, right? Where you could um, be showing up inclusively or doing something, maybe even unintentionally, that could be threatening you showing up as an inclusive leader. And I know that can be an exhausting thing to think about. Like, I remember there were leaders who had really good intentions, but through conversation, I would find that they thought that being an inclusive leader was like something they would learn and then they would just show up the next day and the switch would be flipped and they would, suddenly be that leader, and it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But I think in life most things don't, right? Like you do have to be committed every day and think about the ways in which you yourself, what kind of biases do you have that you need to navigate and manage? What ways have you maybe made assumptions before about someone else, yourself, the work, and always just creating an environment where the people around you have demonstration from you that it's safe to challenge you thoughtfully, right? That it's safe to share things that maybe aren't the most pleasant things to hear about yourself or how you could be showing up better. All of those things I think play into what we talk about with psychological safety. And I think when you have psychological safety, that's when you really do have the most opportunity to hear from your teams and for you to be able to show up in a way that they need. I think inclusion, what it looks like for you to be inclusive is going to be different for every leader. So I think keep that in mind, that You might see a colleague who does something that seems really powerful and works really well for their team. That might not work for you for a variety of reasons. And um, inclusion can be very individual. So, what feels like inclusion for me and where I'm at in my life and who I am may not feel like inclusion for you, Kathy, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I always tell a story with leaders about a leader I had when my first son, who's now 11, was a baby. I was a new mom. I was learning about what it means to balance being a mother and having a child and a career, which I was not at all prepared for. But I remember um, the leader that I had at the time, he was a very early riser and he wanted to do his meetings at like 8 a.m. It was always like, let's do a morning huddle at 8 a.m. And I was making those huddles, but before this, the thing that no one knew was that getting there and being in the seat to have this huddle at 8 a.m. I always joke, I felt like I was throwing my son out the sunroof and like at daycare. Like I was take him and I was like running, huffing, puffing. I would get to my seat, I'd be like sweating. And I was completely disengaged. I never really participated in that huddle much at all because I remember being like, does he have his bottle? Is it like, did I lock my doors? Like, I mean, my head was everywhere else other
Yeah.
than that meeting. And I remember, we were having like a one-on-one one day. And eventually I think I just said to him, like, is there any way that I might be able to like join the huddle from the phone? Like I might be parking. But if I could just have that extra 15 minutes to make sure that my son is like good at daycare, like it would make things a lot better. And I think I could participate easier. And he was like, oh, of course. Why didn't you tell me? Yes. I mean, we could move it back to 8:30. Would that work for you? Right. But we had never had any
That
discussion.
conversation.
I was a little nervous about asking for any level of flexibility there, which could have been a variety of reasons, right? Like it could have been my own bias that I was bringing into the situation of like, well, you having a child now doesn't mean that anything needs to change. But in reality, a lot changes when you have a child. And in order for women to stay in the workplace, parents to stay in the workplace, sometimes we need this flexibility or some of these concessions. And it turns out it was something that was very easy and something that wasn't a big deal to my leader. But that's one of those examples of like, without a really honest conversation and without me feeling comfortable enough to bring it up, we may have never gotten there. And I would have continued to just be very anxious in the morning,
Yeah.
disengaged, right?
Yeah. And it's one of the things that we try to coach leaders is first know themselves. So we have a E3 leadership profile, which is to know yourself, right?
Yeah.
What are your values, non-negotiables? What do you need to be successful? Like, how do you set yourself up? But then to share that with your team, to be vulnerable, but then get their profiles back so that you start to create that dialogue, because hopefully that would have been brought out sooner. Like, oh, wait a minute, you're a new mom. What time do you have to drop your kids off, or what does daycare look like, right? Like
Right.
leaders should, well, let's ask the question, is it appropriate and do you think it's okay for the leader to ask some of those personal questions of their
I think
team
you have
members?
I think you have to be careful. But I think there's some things that aren't intrusive because they're just facts, right? You're a new mom. And being able to say, hey, if there is anything that you may need when it comes to, you know, our schedule, how we've been doing things, if there's anything that I could do to be more helpful to you as ramp back up or you come back into the office, let me know. And then maybe just continuing to offer the space for that over a period of time, because I do think sometimes, again, we can get very you know transactional and maybe pragmatic sometimes, where we're like, okay, I asked the question on July 25th, I'm not asking again. I already did that. But the fact is, sometimes when we first hear something, we're like, oh wow, maybe, I mean, I wasn't expecting that, I wasn't prepared to maybe answer that question. Maybe if you ask again in our next one-on-one, I might be more comfortable to say, oh, you did ask that in our last one-on-one and I thought about it. here's some things that might, if it's possible, here's some things that might actually help out in terms of me being able to integrate me now being a mother and also still giving my best here at work. Like, what does that look like to bring those worlds together?
Yeah, I've often coached folks. They're like, well, I don't know how to tell my manager, like, I need something. And often I look at it and say, well, help them understand how it will help you be better at their job, at your job, so that'll help them be more successful. And the way you said it was like, hey, if I had 15 more minutes, I could show up, I'll be more present, I can provide more value. And so
Yeah.
you really put it in their kind of what's in it for me
Right. Right.
discussion, so that they see, oh, this isn't about you only, it is about you, but
Mhm.
oh no, this is good for the team, for all of us.
Yeah, and maybe even in some cases, like offering examples of, like, if you're a leader that's been at this for a while, and you know that there's certain life events or things that happen that you've sort of managed people through before. Like I at that same time period, I think when I first came back from leave after having my son, I remember my leader at the time who had never had children. Um, this is two different leaders, but the leader I had when I first came back from leave, she said to me, "Oh, we're like on the phone before I officially come back." She's like, "I have not done this before, but I've been told by people who've reported to me that you don't want to start on a Monday. You don't want to come back on a Monday." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And she's like, "No, you really don't. Like, try Wednesday or Thursday." And, like, I mean, because she offered that, I was like, "Okay, like, I'll do I'll do Wednesday." And I found, like, oh, by Wednesday at, like, 4 p.m., I was exhausted. I didn't even know how I was gonna do Thursday and Friday. Imagine if I would have done Monday,
Start on
like,
Monday.
one of those tips that I wouldn't have thought of on my own because I hadn't lived through this. But she knew because she had some folks that were who had gone through having babies while reporting to her, and she knew that that was something that made a difference, even if just from a mental well being standpoint. So I think sometimes it's like, maybe if this isn't you, you don't need this tip, but here's something that I've learned as a leader before that maybe you want to consider. We don't always know, I think, what we need as humans. We don't know it sometimes until, we get it. And then we're like, oh, this is helpful.
Well, and I think when you look at leadership, at the end of the day, we don't have all the answers and we're not expected to have all the answers.
Hmm.
Right. And
Yeah,
it's about chatting and talking and learning and observing and coming up with plans, right, to set us up all up for success, because it should be a win-win for everyone.
absolutely. I mean, and I do think that's something we have to continually combat, the notion that leaders have to have all the answers, right? And if that is something that's forming within your organization, you might want to get reflective and ask some questions like, what is it about our culture or how we're showing up that's giving people the impression that, it's not a safe place to say, I'm not sure, let's figure this out together, or I don't have that answer, but I can get it for you. Like, what is it that makes people feel like if they don't show up with all the answers, then they're not doing a good job as a leader? Because that could be something culturally that you'd want to explore so you can uncover and make some changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So I told you this would go quick. We're already over our time already. So just kind of to wrap up, I mean, you have given us so much goodness here of, inclusion. So DI, yes, maybe the word is not popular at the moment, but the meaning behind it of belonging and inclusion is still relevant. It's about showing up, it's about caring, it's about providing psychological safety for people. And it's not something you learn and the next day you start doing it. It's a practice, is what I heard you say. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I love as you talk about it, and we were actually having this conversation on Tuesday. We did a lunch and learn around leading through uncertainty. And one of the HR leaders that joined us then was talking about they practiced some of the changes ahead of time. And this is becoming a recurring theme here. You have to be prepared for the unknown.
Yes.
And you need to have programs set up to create that psychological safety. And I think that's what you bring to the table, Amber, is, you know, HR is not just it's not just the compliance, it's the people side. It's caring, it's making sure that the teams are prepared to deliver results for the business.
Absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, you have to do the best you can with what you have, and then when those moments do hit, sometimes you find out, well, we need some more things. But what we have and what we've been working at can also show up to meet the moment. And that's what I'm hoping that we can continue to do. I think the work still is incredibly important. I think we have an opportunity here to make incredible strides while we have all of the eyes and everybody trying to figure out what do we do with this work. I think in general, those if those were committed, stay committed, keep moving, and navigate as best you can through these challenges. But people still need you. They still need this work to continue, and I'm here to support in any way that I can.
I love it. So can people reach out to you, Amber, on LinkedIn
Absolutely.
and
On
connect?
LinkedIn, Amber Wynne.
Excellent. And I am so excited to have you in my corner because I definitely don't have all the answers. And I love when I can have an expert, to talk to and say, how do we do this? What's going to work? What do we need to do differently? Because it's a joint effort. We're all in this together.
Likewise,
So
Kathy. Thank you for having me.
thanks so much for joining us. And for those that joined us, thanks for listening. Hope you all have taken a couple of nuggets away as I have. And if you want to learn more about E equals Y, you can check us out www.e=y.com. And if you want to learn some of these techniques of how to be a better leader, how to be a better listener, how to really treat people the way they need to be treated, feel free to join us at the boot camp, which is starting on October 8th. Thank you all and have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.